Welcome back to the show, folks. I hope that Dan here has given a lot of people hope when it comes to certain things, whether it be, oh man, are we ever going to make it? Are people waking up? Look, his folks are spot on. They got him. He is what we hope the next generation will be, that there is a pulling the head out of the tuchus and seeing things for what it is. And so, Dan, I want to kind of do like a rapid fire, since this is the last segment, of some issues and get your opinion on it. So let's start. First of all, you said you're a proponent of ending the Fed?
Yeah, I let the free market set the price of currency. Very
good. So end the Fed. How about S 1867, National Defense Authorization Act, and the ability now of the government to hold American citizens indefinitely without due process? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I could probably just anyone here would agree that, and it's great because it's actually uniting the left and the right. Pretty much everyone's saying it's a bad idea. The thing is, though, is that you see this is the ultimate pork. It's wrapped in a bill that funds a bunch of military things. So it's like, well, we've got to pass this bill, but, are we going to have to choose between having this unconstitutional provision or funding our military?
My thing is why on earth would you attach something like that to a funding bill? And, of course, we know the answer, because you can't go and say, well, let's introduce an amendment to do away with the Fourth Amendment and the 10th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, heck, with the whole Constitution. And that's essentially what they would have to do, would be to enact legislation that nullifies those amendments. But they're not going to do that because it would fail instantaneously, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so they either just do it by fiat or whatever.
Right, and so I think it's an absolutely horrid bill. But the flip side to that is, now it says anybody that's considered like an extremist, anti-government, anything like that. The brush is broad. The brush stroke is broad when it comes to classifying who a terrorist really is. Would you say that the people in Washington, could you classify them as terrorists?
Even if I did, I don't think they'd allow the bill to pass that would name them as such. But yeah, and remember, I think if I have my memory straight, a while back there was a flap because the Homeland Security was going to classify right-wing groups that focused on issues like abortion and veterans who are coming home as watched because they might be having terrorist connections. So right. They really have no constitutional or statutory. I don't think they have boundaries to what a terrorist could be. I mean, I guess they're just relying on the prudence of the government, but that's probably not a very good thing to rely on. Not a
very good thing. And if anything, it's all propaganda. For example, the Department of Homeland Security says that anybody that stores 7 days or more of food is classified or can be considered as an extremist or a terrorist, which is backwards from what personal responsibility dictates. Because, there was a time, Dan, when people canned their food to get through the winter. And so we've kind of become or evolved, or I actually call it devolved, into this culture of convenience. And that there's a lot of things that people have lost their way or lost the skills to do. Have you in your education embraced any skills or things that may be lost today, as far as in modern day society, that may have been something that was commonplace many years ago?
Yeah, well, generally, in public school, you're like you said, you're pretty much completely with the state-run school the whole day. Then you come home, you have a bunch of homework to do, so you don't have much time to be around the house or whatever. But I've been working with my dad more on farming or whatever, so that's a good thing. And I've been able to, besides study economics and other stuff, which is important, I've been able to learn some practical life skills which is, I wouldn't have been able to do before because, time was just completely taken up and I wouldn't have really wanted to bother anyway.
John King, you wanted to say something about canning, did you?
Yes, Joe. Many of the audience members might remember that you call me the canning king. Back in June 1st of 2009, I took and cooked a nice juicy steak with all the fixings and the seasonings in it. I put it in a ball mason jar and I used my pressure cooker and I canned it. Well, I took one of those cans out of storage and we put it with some noodles and had a very delicious meal. The meat was very, very juicy, very tender. It held its consistency, and the meal was absolutely delicious. And if my wife wouldn't have told me that she was using the meat that we canned 2.5 years ago, I'd have never known the difference. So if someone wants to learn how to can meat for preservation, I would highly recommend it.
Something else that if I can quickly mention this about canning is that people tend to see, some people tend to see people who can as people who, are like preparing for the apocalypse or whatever. But another thing to think about is inflation. I mean, food inflation. Sure. If you can get a bunch of stuff at a low price, you can buy it up and save money in the long run because, if food inflation kicks in, you're going to be making a profit because you bought it back then at a much lower price.
Dan, you bring a tear to my eye. I mean, this has to be one of the best conversations I've had in a long time on the air. And thank goodness because, typically oftentimes I'll bring on a guest that has different views from mine or, and somewhat, and we end up getting into an argument at some point in time. But it's just so refreshing to have somebody that's so plugged in on reality. And that's really what it is. I mean, when we talk about this kind of stuff, it's reality, folks. And he's right. Right now, if you calculate inflation, pre-1980 standards, we're running about 11%. What do you think of the Fed's calculation of not including food, clothing, gasoline, energy, that kind of stuff? Isn't that a sham, Dan?
Well, yeah, one of the guy who probably originally got me interested in politics was Glenn Beck, and he pointed out, I think on his show once, that the Feds, because, the stagflation in the 70s was so bad, in order to make the numbers look better, they switched it. And so I think, if I'm remembering right, it's off by a factor of 10 or something around that. And, now they did, and they also, my mom's talked to me about this, they discount, I think, food and gas from the CPI anyway.
Yes.
And, food and gas would be, areas, those are the essentials. Before, if you had to survive with only two things on the CPI, it would be food and gas. So they're leaving off the two most important things. And so in the first place, even if the CPI is accurate, they're making it even worse because they're discounting a whole bunch of numbers that's just, to make the situation look better.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. The issue, of course, is the fact that when you have a business cycle that's run by the Federal Reserve or, foreign banks, everything like that, you're going to have bubbles. You're going to have the bubble bursting. So that it's a roller coaster ride, an absolute roller coaster ride of, the economy going up and down. But one thing that's interesting is this roller coaster ride is about to come to an end. At least that's the way I see it, because you just cannot get growth in a society where you have to tax people so that you can carry people from cradle to grave, or that, you have such a large welfare state. And that, I think that's one of the major problems that we've come into. And a lot of the listeners, they always say, well, I think back to the time that was. And that's really what it is. Well, I really, truly feel, and I wonder if you can weigh in on this real quick. What do you think we'll ever see life the way it was? Or do you think that we're looking at something where it's going to change permanently going forward?
Well, what's good about America, at least, is that because it's pretty much, I think, post World War I and World War II, where the European welfare states really take off, which is where we're heading to. Mm-hmm. The Europeans were pretty complacent with it. They had lost, even though England was kind of the birthplace of the modern ideas of liberty, they went all into this idea that the government could take care of everyone, including the corporations. But luckily, the United States, we always met it with some kind of blowback. And oftentimes, you'd see every once in a while, you'd see someone who is tremendously conservative. I mean, like Ronald Reagan, in response to decades of progressivism. And so I think it's better because in America, we still have that kind of morale, and we're not like completely giving in to this idea of the government, and it seems we're like politically more resilient than people in other countries who have gone down a path similar to ours.
Absolutely. Guys, Dan's YouTube channel again, EducatoriumEuphorium. Please go and subscribe today. It's been fantastic having you on the show, Dan, and I hope to have you on again someday for sure. Maybe to get an update on how you're faring at the very least, but more so we can have another discussion again about the issues, because like I said, it's so refreshing to have a young person like you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great. I usually don't get to talk to adults like this, so it's really been fun.
That's great.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
No sweat. Folks, stand by. Hour number 2 coming up in about 8 minutes. You're listening to Freedomlink Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network.